off.
I was like, you're ping ponging
One,
everything.
one day I'll do that, but that's still going to be out there. So anyway, good morning and welcome to Sunday Story Hour, take 2, where we share real life stories of how human design has helped people tell a richer, more empowered story of who they really are. I'm Kathy Bashanko, and my guest this week is my dear friend, Nancy Fairchild. Nancy and I were kind of set up. We met each other through training when we both signed up for doing the quantum alignment system, which uses EFT tapping with human design, quantum human design. And it goes through 9 different resiliency keys, which we tapped on together. And that was a huge bonding experience. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that. But I have actually told the person who set up the whole program and put us together that I would have paid for the program just to become friends with Nancy. So I'm very excited for you guys to meet her. And she is a 1-3 emotional generator. And she is just a really neat person with a lot of cool things that she does. And I think you're going to really enjoy hearing her human design story. And I know I'm making her blush, but I am going to just say, Nancy, do you feel like you're ready to tell us your story?
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, I am. I love telling stories, actually. And I think our little beginning where we ping-ponged all over the place actually is a really cool introduction to us, because that's kind of how we came together to begin with, right? We
Right.
kind of ping-ponged in our energies until we became familiar with one another. So, yeah. So prior to coming into human design, I was working as a recovery coach in an agency in the field of addictions and recovery. And I was working as a peer, and I would meet with people who were questioning whether the lifestyles they had been living was a pathway that they wanted to continue. I had just recently moved back to my hometown after being away for 5 years. And I stumbled upon human design in a point right prior to realizing that I was going to desperately need it. They say human design picks you, and it definitely did at the time when I was ready. Right after moving home, about 2 months into being back in my hometown, my son had a tragic accident and was burned. And it was coupled at about the exact same time that human design had come into my world. And so while I was at the burn recovery center 4 hours away from home, I always had human design books with me. I always had human design literature, materials, quantum alignment system, tapping with Kathy. Like, this system just rose up like a lotus to pick me up and to grow me and to help me to respond as the emotional generator that I am. So it was really perfect and beautiful in the way that it introduced itself to me, as well as the community that I am now in with everybody, quantum alignment, human design, whether I've met you personally, whether I've not met you personally. And it's really helped me to define into my differentiation, right?
Mhm.
And to realize that everything that I have been living outwards towards is in its best alignment for me, even though it's got a lot of pain points. This is exactly what I'm here to do in a tribal way.
Okay, yeah. So now who did you say introduced human design to you? Do you remember, or was it just something you found? I don't. I'm sure.
I have a tendency to magnetize to me what is going to show up. There was 3 different people from 3 different genres that all said human design in a matter of 12 hours. They weren't directly introducing me or bringing it to my awareness, but they had mentioned it. And in true generator fashion, I responded like, oh, the universe has said human design 3 different times to me in 12 hours. I must go look this up.
Well, the 1-3 and you must go look it up, right?
Yes. And so
Okay.
the interesting thing was in my phone, though, I had hundreds of bits and pieces of human design and gene keys saved over a course of maybe 7 years. Little bits and
You just
pieces
you didn't even know what you were saving. It just resonated. Yeah.
just resonated. Yep.
Awesome. Yeah. So now by the time I met you, you had already, like, you were starting to look at some human design with, you'd done some training with Katie, right? With Katie, the sort of spiritual, I always forget her last name.
No,
Manifestor.
Katie actually came last for
Oh,
me.
that came last. Okay. See,
Yeah, I had hired a coach before I immersed myself in human design. I knew instantly as soon as I started looking at it that this was a system that I desired, craved, and had been trying to create on my own, to be honest, with bits and pieces of everything. So that's probably why I had all those bits and pieces with that, 1-3 dive deep, have bits and pieces, what works, what doesn't. So I had actually hired a coach and had worked a couple months with her and left. Honestly, she was beautiful in what she did. And yet I left more confused than when I had come in, because I didn't quite know how to apply the information that I had received. And so that started giving me some ideas about where I wanted to go with it.
yeah. And the first place you went with it was the quantum alignment system, or did I miss anything?
No, you're correct. I started to observe and just like really start to dive in and investigate and explore all of the energies and how people were presenting and what I was most attracted to and how I learned and what they were presenting over and over and over again. And I kept going back to Karen Curry Parker and the quantum alignment system. I really like how she incorporated many pathways into how she taught. And that really attracted me. And then I just thought, you know what, you're going to end up doing all of it. So just do it to begin with.
Yeah.
Just jump in.
Back when we did it, you could purchase quantum alignment system and it included the same level of quantum human design training. So that's what we did. But now I believe you have to certify. They've changed it to where you have to certify first in quantum human design before you can take quantum alignment system. So if anything seems confusing in what we're talking about, it's because things have changed. But so that's how we met. And I remember there was a 3-day live training before Betsy Batista paired up people. And so both of us had opportunities to be in the love seat and get tapping done. So we'd been exposed to each other a little bit in the group setting, but we didn't know each other at all. And I think that, the universe really came together in a way that was very surprising, because as great as it is now, our first meeting did not go well at all in either of our opinions, right?
Correct.
It was such a great learning experience. And so I'm going to let you tell about that story from your perspective, if it feels correct for you to respond to that. And then I'll share a little of my thoughts on it.
Sure. Thank you. So it's interesting because I have gate 19, right? And that's about being emotionally present and vulnerable. And so I'm speaking a little bit on hindsight to that.
Right.
But the vulnerability that we came together with, which, was through tapping and not knowing one another. Kathy is a self-projected projector, and no,
Right. Not self-projected.
yeah, that's right.
I do have, that's okay. I process very similar to a self-projected projector because of one of my splits, but I just
Yes.
wanted to clarify.
Sorry. Yes, thank you.
But yeah.
And so, I had minimal knowledge of the types at that point in time, and I was still very focused on learning about generator energy and very focused on, my own energies. And so I had little experience with having someone who needs to sound out some things, and as well as a guide. And so, when Kathy and I would come together, this energy of the projector, from my side of this, the projector energy would hit me. It would poke me like an auger. And I just was like, whoa, who is this woman? Like, whoa. And to me, because I hadn't known enough to invite and recognize, Kathy's intelligence and her great gifts and the things that she was sharing with me, because she recognized that I needed some help with human design and quantum human alignment, because I really was falling behind in our classes due to the trauma of my son. And so I believe that Kathy was really being the true projector and guidance that she truly is, and I've come to love, value, and appreciate. And yet I didn't know that at the time. So it was like, who is this woman? Why is she like slamming me with all of this stuff? And why won't she let me ever talk? Like, I was like getting super frustrated. And so like at one point, generators can become frustrated, and for me, how it manifests, if I hold back and hold back and hold back, it comes out in a burst of energy. And that's exactly what it did. I just said, hello, I'm done with this. We are not going through with this tapping session.
All
I'm
our first time.
Yeah.
This is all in our
Yeah. And I'm just going to wait till our mentor shows up, because I don't think this is going to get fixed between you and I. And intuitively, I knew I still needed to be present, be loving and kind, and still share my voice. Because in where I met Kathy at, I was still learning how to speak. I was still learning how to use, my defined throat. And I had been conditioned to not have a defined throat. I sat in silence for a very long time, and it was terrifying for me to even tell Kathy, like, I'm done with this. I can't do this. And so, like, that's my remembrance, mostly of it. And it ended up being extremely beautiful, though. And so I will pass the magic mic to you, Kath.
Yeah, so that first time when we met, I was trying to find a balance between, okay, I know what we need to get done here. And but there was this thing where I felt I was trying to draw you out, and in what I felt, I guess I was doing was shutting you down. And this was in the beginning, and we learned so much because this was a couple years ago, and it was really beautiful once we all of a sudden both said, wait a minute, look at this. And I looked at our connection chart, and I saw that we have 4 compromise channels in our connection. I have 3 I only have 3 channels, and the 3 channels I have all compromise a gate for Nancy. So just energetically, I already make her uncomfortable, me not doing anything. So understanding that just the energy of my design can make you feel compromise is the best word. That was huge. And then the one channel to your throat, I don't have anything in that area. So that felt a certain way to me, and that's that she has the genius to freak channel, right? I have so many genius to freaks in my life. The 2343 is known as the genius to freak because it's either wonderful words of genius wisdom, right? Which Nancy often has, or it's like, where is this freak coming from, right? So we were able to look at our relationship through the chart and say, ooh, look, this stuff isn't personal. And let's really look at how to look at the energy in a way that honors who the other person is and doesn't create a story in our mind about what this person is doing to us. And we were able to start doing that in that first meeting. We decided not to tap that meeting. We started having this kind of conversation when Nancy said, I'm not comfortable here. And I was like, wow, I had no idea. And then that's when I looked at the chart and I was like, well, of course she's not comfortable. All my energy compromises hers. Mm-hmm. So and then that was just a really cool thing to look at and to understand. And what is beautiful too is we have one electromagnetic channel, and it is my 13 connects to her gate 33, and that channel is from the G center, the identity center, to the throat, and it's known as the channel of the prodigal in traditional human design. And I'm blanking right now on the name of it in quantum human design, but it's all about storytelling and narrative. And it was really something wonderful because once we changed the narrative that we were telling about each other and ourselves in that situation, everything changed. And it's been such a gift to have Nancy in my life because it so easily, both of us could have just as easily called up, or emailed Betsy and said, whoa, that was horrible. And it's not going to work. But we actually used the tool of human design to understand what we were feeling and process it in a way that really was quite incredible. And, Nancy was in such a, I don't know, raw place, I guess, with what was going on. I mean, without telling too much about her son's injuries, he burnt his whole foot and couldn't walk. And he had custody of, how old was Oakley at the time? Month, right? How old?
He was 4 months when my son's accident occurred. And at the time he was still very present with Oakley's mother. And the trauma of the accident created so much stress within the relationship and having a new baby that, both parents weren't able to maintain that level of relationship. And it just basically kind of exploded and blew up. Like it was a new pain point, a new trauma point for all of us in our lives. And it was, it wasn't one trauma of my son being burnt, but it was a blessing. And even if it's a blessing, a change in your life still creates chaos and, a newness that you have to integrate into your world. And so these young adults, they just had a child through C-section, and, they were managing this, and then this other trauma showed up. So I'm all about my tribe. I have tribal wave. So of course, this is my son, my grandson, and his family. And, I'm also about women in trauma because that's part of my story. So to support his partner at the time was super important as well. And vulnerable is and raw is a really good way to describe the first year and a half that we were coming together, And it's funny because my life's work is gate 44 coming to meet.
Yeah, which is recognizing patterns of the past, right? And you have been doing that not just with your own immediate tribe, but the generational trauma of not just your family, but even just the area that you're in, right?
Yep.
And can you speak to a little bit about what that is all about? Because that's really key to your work, and you were talking about some of that.
Yeah. So for the last, okay, so I'm just going to go back for just a minute to make more sense of this. So come this September 22nd, I will have been in recovery for alcoholism, codependency, food addiction for the last 23 years. It'll be 23 years in September. And so my story has been unfurling and unraveling and going from one of pain point, codependency, addiction, into, recovery. And then the last couple of years, I would say, since human design has, joined in on that unraveling in that story, I would say it's gone from, recovery into radiance, and really unfurling into the radiance that I am. And, this is hindsight and looking backwards, backwards trajectory, but like, wow, my whole incarnation cross speaks of this. It's amazing. So like all of a sudden the work that I've been doing, 6 years ago, I was introduced to the concept of becoming a recovery coach, and I worked for an agency, and it was a beautiful relationship. They became my tribe in a time when I had to travel my path alone and separate from some of my family, more to find me than anything wrong per se. And in that process of finding me, like, all of this just opened up, and I really started to realize the importance of, the storytelling and identifying the patterns of pain and sense. I've always been super sensitive, and that's like in my gate 19, right? I'm super sensitive to the emotional needs of my tribes, no matter which tribe I'm in, because I'm like, if a puppy whimpers, they're my tribe. And so like I have this innate ability to be able to sense that within somebody, which really, is a help in the sense of being able to just go right straight to the point. Like, let's just talk about this. And so what I've come to realize in my stories and in my, in the translation from pain to power, what I've come to realize for people is that we're really not healing anyone. We're really restoring them to the radiance that they really are by talking about conditioning, removing stigma, removing the stigma of addiction. And, what I don't think some people understand is that addiction works until it doesn't. If you're in a point of pain that makes you feel like you don't know how to live within the life that you have woken up and found yourself in, addiction works to numb that out, because some people may not choose to stay if they're in that pain. And so it works until it doesn't. And I'm really about rechanging and retelling the story about trauma, big T trauma, as well as little t trauma, because it's often a series of little t traumas that leads us into this bigger T trauma, as well as some of us just jump it straight in. I have 7 planets in Scorpio, so I just jumped right straight into big O traumas, right? Like, let's get to the gist of this and let's get down to it. And that's a little oversimplified, but it's true. Like, so for me, this, human design has really, really shown me the beauty of the life path I chose, the beauty of my purpose. A lot of people didn't really look at my purpose as a beautiful path, right? But it's turning into such a magnificent, radiant, like, state of being that it's the lighthouse, right? I think we're just wiping off the lens of the light beam in that lighthouse so that you can actually see the magnificence and the power of that.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. So, yeah, and I think that, you having that, you got that classic pressure cooker, right? We talked about it last week with Marla. You got the open root and the open head. And then the only gate you have on your open root, or undefined root, technically open means no gates, but the undefined root has the hanging gate 19 that you've been talking about, this gate of sensitivity. So and the root is, that pressure to do, right? The root is where we're meant to be grounded, but it's also where we get the pressure to do things. And with all your pressure to do coming through this lens of sensitivity, it can make you really, like, it almost feels like it could have an open solar plex kind of feel to it. It can make you so sensitive that you avoid, the things that trigger it, I guess is the best word, right?
Yeah, what it did for me, to be honest with you. So my gene key, my purpose is 19. And what that open root really did for me was gave me a sense of pressure to really just take care of everybody around me. I just felt this pressure to care for it, right? And I kind of being guided to talk about the 44 in the open spleen for me as well, because how I think it manifested for me was in my open spleen. I always had this sense that I was in jeopardy, in danger. I always felt that my pure existence was in jeopardy. I was always feeling. And, I was listening to some of Ra's material on the open spleen. And one of the things that he said that really made sense to me, I know they don't directly connect in the chart, but I feel like this is part of my pathway to talk about. My open root and my in my undefined root, my undefined spleen, I always had this feeling of codependency from that 19, and in Gene Keys it is about codependency. And I had this need, this pressure in my root to always make sure everybody could exist, and if I didn't do something about it, we were all doomed. And I've always felt that pressure in my life, my whole entire life, up until about 2 months ago, even. Yeah. So it's funny because some of the pieces of my story, which includes my sister passing when I was 10, I really had some trauma that reflected that whole feeling of experience too. So the night that my sister passed, I felt if I had gotten to my mother faster at the age of 10, that maybe she would have been able to live. Open spleen. So like amplified, right? Everything within my pre-sobriety life reflected all these open centers and the pressures to figure it out, answer the questions, get it done, and survive. And I cannot even tell you the amount of terror that I couldn't talk about because I didn't understand what that feeling was within me, that I would not be able to exist if I didn't have other people. And there's that codependency of the 19 as well, right?
Yeah. So, it's beautiful when you can look and see all your pain explained in the shadows of your chart, right? But then how do you take that and get out of the shadows? How did you take that and not let it be like, because you still see people who see that and then they use that as the reason why they're still in the shadows and will never get out of the shadows because I have the 19 and I'm always going to be this way, or I have this open spleen. And you haven't done that. You've, really, I've seen you do the work, and, it's not always a straight linear path out of the shadows, but you're definitely, it's like that upward spiral. What have you?
So I call that particularization, to be honest with you.
right?
You take everything and you put it out on the table, and you see
I'm
all
la-
of it.
That's one of your words.
It is. I've channeled that. I think that's my
Word.
genius to freak at work here, because I channel a lot, and I channel a lot of information that's given to me in the moment. And honestly, I think what happens is there's this magic when two people come together. And the magic is being able for me to just look at someone who's in the most painful point in their life and recognize, they're in pain. This is
Mhm.
pain. This isn't like behaving this way because they woke up and decided to get out of bed and be like, today I'm going to create the worst day of my entire life, right? And so taking all those particles and all those pieces and throwing it out on the table, like I am a firm believer that we have the right to self-determination. And when you're in that space, if somebody can just assist you for a brief moment in time to remove it from your external being, put it externally, put it out there, right? Or internal being to your external, be able to look at it as if it's not your own, and then be able to go, wow, this person needs a moment of compassion. Because most people, whether you've traveled the path of trauma, addiction, even people in their most beautiful radiance that doesn't have to travel a path of lower frequency to higher frequency, I don't think compassion is something that we're taught to sit within. I don't think that we're taught to sit within compassion and to view ourselves with a moment of compassion.
Yeah, or maybe we're taught, some of us are taught to sit with compassion for others.
Others.
Ourselves? No, we're supposed to judge ourselves, right?
Correct, right.
Exactly. I mean, not that we are supposed to, but that's kind of how I grew up.
It,
You know,
it, and
think about what you've done.
yeah, and if you talk, like I spend a lot of time talking to people, a lot of time in the 5 years that I was actively doing recovery coaching for an agency. I rarely talk to anybody about their active addiction ever. I want to know who you are in the most deepest spaces. I want to explore who you are. And if
Right.
you don't know who you are, let's start getting down to the creation of it. That's the fun part, right? And so to answer your question, it's kind of like a visual of a cup. You've got this cup, and usually when you meet somebody in the field, their cup's water is pretty murky. It's pretty murky. And so we just start adding a little bit more clear water to it, a little more clear water to it, and affirming and affirming and affirming. Go out and integrate. And that helps someone, really admit to their innermost self that there's something worth connecting to other than what we have been connecting to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's where the use of, the chakras come in for me. And that's where teaching and education and sitting and, like our conversation started, having fun with the errors. That was funny. That was a lot of fun to hear us ping ponging. It's like the whole, sound acoustics to particularization. Ping, 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 ping. It's taking particles and making them concentrated into solidified form. And that's
Right.
what we get to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, and I've just realized, like, as far as you're talking about the error at the beginning, which if you're watching this later on YouTube, I will probably cut that off, but
Oh, sorry.
that's okay. But no matter how many times I say, okay, this is what I got to do. I got to do this. Da, da, da. When I go to do it, you'd think I was a manifesting generator or something, because I always skip a step and then one thing goes wrong or something I didn't think of, but whatever, it's all good. But okay, so, you've really been working with you've been working with trauma for many years now. How long have you been in this whole
Well, I've
care?
been living with it for 52 years. And on a professional level as a recovery coach, as well as going back to school and obtaining my CASAC education to sit for my, licensing. It's been 7 years now on a professional level.
And the reason I bring that up is, in the process of understanding your design and then the work you do with others, I think a lot of what you're doing now is so beautiful, and you're using human design to help people rewrite their what did you say? Redefining the stigma of trauma.
Mhm.
And if you can talk a little bit about how you use human design in your process for that now.
Sure. So I'm yet again going to use just my own personal chart just to, keep it. So when I'm working with an individual, the first thing is that I use my own human design chart initially, because storytelling is part of that identification, right? And if somebody can identify with you and you find what you have in common, that person will start to open up and trust you. And so for me, I think it's a blessing because I have the defined sacral, I have the defined emotional solar plexus. And so I can immediately feel where somebody's at and where I can go and talk to them at. And I'm going to go to the most extreme case here, and it may be a little uncomfortable, but really what I feel like I'm doing is helping individuals, no matter where they're at on the spectrum of communication. I feel like I'm normalizing these conversations that are often, in the dark. We don't want to talk about these things. They're uncomfortable, they're painful. And yet, the message of recovery is that you take your most god awful pain thing that you don't want to talk about, and you put that out there first, because from that point forward, it only gets better because you've already disclosed all that stuff, and you're back on a projection in a spectrum towards your radiance again, right? And so
Right.
that's what I often do with people is I introduce them to the concept of pain first. That if you can sit here first, you can sit anywhere because the rest gets easier. And instilling hope in somebody, and that doesn't have to be around addiction, because most people don't get into addiction because they start with a person, place, or thing to give their power away to. Most people start because they have trauma, pain, and places that they just can't share or connect with other people, because that's the nature of trauma, right? That's the nature of shame, is to isolate and take you away from your innate radiance. And so my quest has been to help change the whole concept of what addiction even is, because that's not what I focus on. I really use human design to show where their gifts are, like help them remember, I want you to remember who you are.
Right.
And get back to the right of self-determining who you are, because this is who we are, creative beings with the power to just flip from the dark to the light. When it's amazing to me. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, one of the things I want to make sure we touch on too is when we were talking one day and you were telling me of how when you're working with clients and just friends in general, you've started to refer to yourself as the human design gatekeeper, and
Yeah.
not in the way people, like in a real life way, not as in sometimes gatekeeper can be used as negative, but like basically you're holding the gate open and letting them just kind of walk in how they want. But explain what you meant by that, because I thought it was beautiful.
Thank you. So one of my original understandings of the gate 44 was the gatekeeper, like that we are kind of like a salesman almost. We are the first thing that you see. So like when you see me, I want it to be warm and enveloping and welcoming, like, hey, here's a pot of soup cooking, take your shoes off, come on in and sit down. How can I help you? And I really feel like that's one of the rules of that gate 44 is quieting the fears, right, of the past, and being able to hold that door open and be a warm invite into where I would like you to be able to at least get a glimpse of and make a self, determined decision whether you'd like to continue on the journey. Now, there may be other people that are way better at helping you learn, digest, incorporate, and integrate your design charts with you. And I'll share with you, it's funny because when we first met, I was always blown away. I was always like $1 late, day short, because I had all these other obligations and choices I had made to, be present for my son and our family. And yet I still had this need to be present within quantum alignment. And I would show up and you and I would be sitting there, right? And you would be talking to me in such elevated ways, like you're getting it, you're getting it, you're getting it. And I'm over here like, Kath, I'm still at the gate. I'm still over here at the gate and you're so far in the pastures, like watching how to sheep herd and do all the things that I would desire to do, but I can't be there. And at first it would come up for me as like, geez, I'm really I'm falling behind. And then one day I was sitting in that 44 and all of a sudden it dawned on me I was in perfect alignment with that gate for me. I am meant to hold the door open for people. I am meant at a very basic, fundamental level to like make the gate look like someplace, not make it because it's out of integrity or authenticity, but because that's the beauty of it, right? Here's the whole package. And I see things in the right side of my brain all the time and big, I can see that overall eagle's view all the time. And so like, I'm more than happy to collaborate with people and say, okay, here's the big package. And yeah, I think this person is way better at helping you. May I introduce you? And then you guys can take it from there, right? Like I'm here to be the gatekeeper, not only between like human design, but dimensions, worlds. And that's funny because, I was thinking about this and that's also 19, like parts of gate 19 in the gene keys. It's being able to connect to the multidimensional worlds, And when I was younger, when all this trauma was occurring, I would leave my childhood home and go out in nature and connect with the fairies and be like, I wonder what this tree feels like being green. And I mean, that's the beauty, that's the purpose. That was in my purpose to even go out and sit in these trees and be like, I'm going to be green today and connect with a new dimension. And so I feel like that's the purpose of my gatekeeping too, is, hey, there's so many more dimensions than what we're seeing at the moment. Like, here, let me introduce you. Come on in for a minute.
See, and how I think of it, just knowing you and knowing you're nurturing and you haven't even mentioned your gate 50, which is the cauldron, which is, I think that's where your soup comes from. Gate 44 is the rest of it, but the soup's in gate 50. And you have that whole, like, for those of you who don't know, from the spleen over to the sacral and then back to the solar plexus, there's 4 gates that make up that defense circuit. And Nancy has 3 of them. So she's very tribal defense, right? So, But so I see you as, it's a wild, crazy world out there and people are getting knocked around by the wind or whatever. And you're there holding the door open and just telling people it's safe to come inside.
Mhm.
And you're getting them out of that place of fear of like, no, I know the dangers out here. I'm afraid to go in there. And they're afraid to do the work. And you get them to where they're like, no, it's safe. Come inside the gate. And then there are people inside the gate that can help you. And you definitely help them. And I think you minimize how much you're in to some degree. But I do think there's something to be said with, you can be a great doctor, but no, you're not you don't ever want to be a brain surgeon, right? So, there's different degrees and you're going to work on the things that your sacral says yes to, right? And
If I can take just a second, I want to circle back around. Now I'm doing the manifesting generator thing. I'm going to circle back around for a second. One of and I'm going to do this in typical fashion, like a quick short story. When I was in trauma as a younger child, one of the things that I often saw was to go outside, from internal to external. And there's that codependence piece, right? That we seek to go escape and go outside of ourselves and give our power outside. As a child, I would leave the home and leave my internal being and escape and detach and go outside. And so I always sought to go outside of the gate because the fear and the pain was inside the gate for me at that time. And so the funny thing is, the funny thing as life, takes us along the path, we had some family trauma occur later on in my life after I had gotten into recovery and was pretty stable in my recovery. I was about 6-7 years into it. And something happened within my birth family structures that oddly enough removed my ability to skirt outside the gates and forced me to go back internal into my own gates. And that, I believe, is when when human design started being introduced to me, even though I didn't consciously know it, because all of these little tidbits that I had been saving was to figure out how to save myself internally, an internal locus, where before, my sense of compass was external up until this point in my life. And then this situation forced me to come back home inside, find my own locus of control, and to be like this being that I had never been before. And I was like, oh man, I don't even know how to do this. Like, what is all this stuff? And I think that's the importance of where human design comes in, because no matter, like, if you're coming back in the gate, like internally, and you've not been there very often, like the power of differentiating yourself and finding you, that's the importance, right? That's the pieces that we talk about. And so whether I'm referring to somebody or I just stay present while you go internal, that's an interesting gate to hold too.
Yeah.
So there's lots of ways gates work for internal and external locus of controls, right?
We're talking about like physical gates, not planetary gates. Maybe
I mean, like there's so many gates, right?
Keep it not too confusing. Hold the door open, because the gate, now I was like gate 44 and then the code. Yeah, you know what I mean. But that's really cool. And I notice a lot of people, and this is totally understandable when you're newly in recovery. Part of that is, a real needing to really separate you from the people who have hurt you in the past and the people who are still not in recovery, and needing to have like really strong boundaries. But then there comes a time, correct me if this is not true because you're the expert, but I believe that there comes a time where when you're truly healed in who you are, you can be present for people who are still not healed and it not take you down.
Yes, and.
Okay.
Yes, and. So one of the very first things that I learned within the first 2 weeks of my recovery was from an old timer in, the self-help program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had all of these things that I trusted in this person and was telling them all the reasons why I drank, right? All the reasons why I needed alcohol to numb myself out. And that woman just looked at me with pure compassion, as well as a strength in her that terrified me. And she said, that's all bullcrap, Nancy. I am going to invite you to become aware that you can get and remain sober despite any condition you come up against, because that's what you need to know. Otherwise, you're going to go back and give all these reasons why you're drinking. You drink because you're an alcoholic. You have an obsession in the mind and you have an allergy in the body, and you do it because you like it. And unless you have a different experience, you're going to die from this. And that's what she told me, Kath. And so for me, I tell people that, yes, obviously, if you are directly in harm's way, we got to get you out of there. And yet, yes, let's get you out of here. And you're going to be able to do this no matter what comes your way. Because the empowerment starts at the moment that somebody realizes this isn't working for me anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's like filling that cup of water with a little bit until it starts to overflow. And eventually the overflow is crystal clear. And it's building that confidence within the internal self that you've got this no matter what. And if you start adding human design into that and showing them why they've got their own life and why they're different and why they've got that path and nobody else gets that path but them, there's magic. There's magic.
Yeah.
There is magic.
So, okay, I want to interrupt for 1 second and just say,
I'm going to go on tangents because I'm passionate.
No, that's good. I love your passion. We've got about 8 minutes left. So if anybody is watching that wants to ask any questions, please put them in the comments and I will bring them up. So far, the only comment we've had was early on. Monica said, all that Scorpio energy attracts psychological avenues, Sun, Moon, Venus, and Jupiter. I think she was looking at your chart maybe when she was saying all that, but you've got even more than that. You said 7 planets. Okay, so, but let's go back to, the whole codependency thing you were talking about, independency or whatever. And when you've talked about gate 19 and gate 44 quite a bit. Are there any other things you look at in the chart when you're looking at like codependency or addictive behaviors that, I don't want to say you're going to have these things, but are very often the shadow manifestation of those areas result in that sort of behavior?
Well, it's interesting because I've been doing a lot of research into this lately. And, I would have to say the open spleen is definitely, a space to really look at, because they say that a lot of addiction is inferiority complex wrapped around with a superiority complex. And, yeah. And so that's like perfectly lower energy of all of the gates to the highest energy of all of the gates, as well as, the reactive and, energies of it all. So it's kind of funny. There's a spectrum that I would look at. And so when I look at all of the gates, I'm going to look at the behaviors of the individual. We're going to look if it's manifesting as reactivity. We're going to look at it as if it's an undefined or a defined center or purely open. And we're going to look to see how the magic in their chart differentiates the ism parts. I seek, misery, or I seek miracles kind of thing in their recovery or within their addiction, because that's going to help. Like, I think all of it is the answer. And yet particularizing down into how it manifests is another way of looking at it. So that's kind of a tricky
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah, I do think sometimes, people get caught up and they say, well, of course he's got this gate, he's going to wind up with this or that, and there is, a lot of people in traditional human design talk about no choice. And we always have a choice, right? And now if we are making choices according to our strategy and authority, we're going to draw the right things to us. And maybe, you can, and I can understand the idea that we might not have a choice in what our best life is ultimately meant to be, because if we're really following our strategy and authority, our body is, and there is no mind choice, our body's making the choice. But we always have the ability to override that. So, I do think that it's tricky to say there's no choice, because that feels like victimhood.
So imagine having an open head center and you have an obsession of the mind. Now imagine had I been a child and we were blessed to have human design at that point, and someone within my world had said, Nancy, let's connect you into that gut feeling, because I always had stomach aches. I always had stomach aches as a child. Right? So I have this blocked energy. And imagine somebody had said, check in with your sacral. And I won't call it a sacrum. I'm just playing with it. But, imagine if somebody had called, and taught me like, hey, use your sacral and make a decision. I'm pretty sure the decisions would have been a lot different.
And don't make the decision right now. Wait until you're clear, where you have that emotional clarity, right?
Yeah.
So listen, we're about at the end here, and I don't see any questions on here, but I want to make sure to allow enough time. First of all, I want to thank you, Nancy, but I do want to also see if you have anything you want to say in closing, and then maybe just let people know how they can connect with you if they're interested in finding out more about what you do, that sort of thing.
Thanks. I want to thank you for inviting me and helping me to show up and be a little more present. And I appreciate that. I just really want to say, like in closing, if you're struggling with something, even if it's not of a substance nature, or, reach out to somebody, multiply the blessings, divide the sorrows. Like we get better this way, no matter what our path is, right? And hold the gate open. Hold the gate open for someone. You just don't know, this may not be the popular way of getting a hold of people, like in a professional sense, but I prefer 1-607-259-9169, because I really like people texting me and saying, hey, this is how I met you. Could we connect up? I really like it to be about personal connection right from the very beginning. And I hold the door open through my phone. So that's really what works best for me. And then we can go from there and create what works best for both of us.
Okay. Thanks, Nancy. So when afterwards, maybe just in the comments, leave that information for people as well. Okay. Yep. But I want to thank you again. And I want to thank everybody who's joined us here, whether it's live or in the replays or later on when we post this on YouTube. But every week we're sharing the stories of how human design has changed someone's personal narrative, and how you speak about yourself matters. So are you ready to rewrite your personal story? If you would like to work with me, you can DM me, or you can set up a free discovery call at kathybashanko.com. And that's just my name. As you can see, anywhere this is posted, my name will be spelled there for you. But I want everybody to have a great day. And I hope I'll see you in the Intuitive Human Design group in Sunday Story Hour next week. Thanks again, Nancy, and thanks to everybody who has joined us.